the CTO and co-founder at Assembly. So I've been working on things under, I guess actually two names, but initially GetScale, it turned into Assembly at some other point in time for about 4 years now. So first I just want to give this is mostly just like an overview of our company and like what we do. So we build a process control system for manufacturing. We try to help manufacturers meet a few different goals: flexibility, reliability, and efficiency. Basically, a bunch of these slides are kind of just like the whys, because it's a little bit more of a like why you should be interested in investing. So I'm just going to reuse this slide deck, honestly. Okay, so we install these systems in the factories to help people actually know what's going on. Like, basically communication is like the overarching problem for people building things around the world. Like, you're not there in the factory, you're not there on the line every day. The workers are, the factory team is, but you have no idea what's actually going to happen. So we overall kind of encourage people to actually, in a software way, to do almost test-driven development. Like, you have to actually test for every characteristic of your product to actually have any guarantees you're going to get what you expect. So we install these systems that go along the line to actually train the worker directly. So you define procedures on our website and such. They go to these systems. We record data from different sensors installed, from cameras, and use like media actually to train the workers, not just like I told someone who's like my contact at the factory, they translated it to Chinese, they talked to me 2 or 3 different managers, they talked to the line worker, that person with the line worker steps through how to put this screw here. So to actually guarantee any of this, we record what the workers actually do and present it on our site so you can actually see step by step what's really happening. I try to do that in like a reasonable time frame also. So like half the work that we kind of did is to communicate from inside of some random factory in the middle of nowhere in China to the US, that a company within a few hours can actually react to something and say, no, you're doing that wrong, not like a week later when they find out that half their units are wrong. So the data in the end gets used for a few different purposes besides just making sure something's done properly initially. So all the data is used later on for things like anti-counterfeiting, or for being able to actually find like when someone returns a product, what did happen that it didn't initially catch. Just because by retaining everything and then you look it up, we can do that kind of thing. So the consoles kind of help the manufacturer meet some goals around like optimization, actually knowing what's going on a level that most of them aren't tracking. And then we let you actually know, as like a product company, a more transparent system, besides just calling one person who's going to talk to a bunch of others. And probably most of the data is just on paper that they wrote down. So super high level. We make this, we put it in the factories and warehouses that you actually track things throughout the supply chain. So it really does help for quality control. You can see like a few instances, defect reductions this high, just because there wasn't really a system for doing it before. Examples of that. So these are some of the companies that we've worked with so far. Because we're a Y Combinator company, a big portion of them are also just kind of works within the community. Yeah, so you recognize Blue Smart probably actually. So they make like a smart suitcase. And like the whole spectrum of products varies a lot too. We go from like, we have like plastic army men, which is really my favorite product actually, because they're just plastic army men in yoga poses. And they're actually one of the most successful products we work with, which is hilarious because that is as simple as something can really get. There's swimsuits. This is a scanning electron microscope. These phone screens are also replacement phone screens for iPhones, have done really well. Yeah. So we're making this new version of our console right now, which is mostly pretty lights on it, just because from a distance you can actually see what's going on. Like, you want to give inside the factory the ability to not have to like talk to everyone to figure out what's going on, and we're just like flashing red lights on the human level, not just like when your machine starts breaking. But yeah, so that's overall what we do. So I'm interested to know more about like what any of you are building, because some of you are doing physical products, I think. So I know I talked to Oliver earlier, and he's making a smart suitcase, kind of like the Blue Smart one, like his better now. So is anyone else working on a like physical product? So what are you making?
Shoes.
Oh, so what kind of shoes? Like
kids' shoes, actually.
What was? So you, but then you also had another product.
Accelerometer, guitar pedal.
Oh, that's interesting. So are you at like the stage of that you're actually like manufacturing it at a larger scale yet, or
Earlier than that right now? Yeah. Can I ask a question, or is that?
You can all feel free to ask questions now. This is basically.
I don't know if this is the right time for it. Super intriguing. I had a previous company where it was also kids products, but different products. So I spent a lot of time in factories and such. So I guess as an initial question, is the sales job you guys convincing the factories, or are you looking for product companies to kind of also leverage in there?
Yeah.
It's both. Okay, yeah, because we had in the past we had such a hard time getting factories to just kind of implement anything, you know, because we were sort of one of many customers, and so it was like I don't know, like unless you're ganged up on the factories, right? Like if you a bunch of customers, otherwise they're sort of like, well, you're one of 10 people this month, so I'm not gonna like install systems because you asked for it necessarily, you know, as in like us as the client company, right? So I'm wondering like what's been a typical journey for you on getting a factory to sign up and rent these consoles essentially?
So our main trick is mostly to start with quality assurance. So because it's like at the very end of the line, and then it's not, the quality assurance issues are really almost entirely up to you. Like the company can't decide what they're going to test because that's your product. So working from quality assurance up the line as it starts to demonstrate the actual benefits of it has definitely been the pattern we overall use.
Do you do automated quality assurance, or do you do
Do you do automatic quality assurance or is it human management?
So basically we kind of consider most automated processes actually like the easy part of the problem in contrast to the human processes. So we focus a lot on final assembly and then trying to capture the data that we can. So you can do a lot with a camera, but not enough to just generically solve all problems, right? So we use tools, yes. So we do both.
So you have cameras along the production line, and you use some kind of AI to...
I wouldn't really call it AI, mostly because to collect enough data in a normalized way to do that would be most of the issue at that point. So we're using like a combination of just like measurement of existing data that we can, like so connected multimeters and calipers initially. And then as you do build up a data set, you can start to do more actual machine learning and such. But most of it is still physical measurement. There are some things you can do with the camera still. If you can get someone to put something in a fixture and get them to light it properly, then yes. But most of the time we can't do that.
So our company is like a manufacturing consulting and sourcing company. We've been in this business for over 30 years. I have some questions. I think it's a very interesting service. One of the questions is that for most of our factories, contract manufacturers, they not only manufacture for one customer. So if I install the sensors or the inspector there, it is very likely that they are also manufacturing the recorded products they manufacture for other customers. So that's one thing, and I think it's also very challenging to convince all these factories to install this there. because there could be some computation interventions. And another thing is that what I see is that most of the sensing or recording is through visual inspection. But I think that there are more quality check that's more than just visual inspections, like weights or the material used, those kind of things. Can you also like record all of things or just visually?
Yeah, so I kind of think that the fact that we have cameras is the thing we focus on mostly just in presentations probably makes it look like we focus on visual quality control. The majority of data is not from cameras because the camera is mostly just good for auditing. Just because you can't normalize everything in a way that you can just extract different images unless you're doing like OCR on something's display. The majority of the data either comes from existing fixtures that people install that we collect the data from. Like you've probably seen like someone has something just like connects to a device, runs some test, dumps some data. That's the majority of the actual information that we use. As far as like multiple installations, another really fun part of the whole system is that all the instructions and such are all per customer and per version of everything they're doing. And as the customer's iterating all of these, we're tracking data across the versions of it and which customer. So it works totally fine for someone's going to change the line really quickly even, like while someone's in the factory modifying everything, or it works with changing customers or changing the whole line over entirely at once, which is a lot harder than, makes it a lot easier than having to go reprint everything, hand annotate everything on these little SOPs and putting them all up. So works for that problem pretty well. Any other questions about?
So my question would be about the variety of the data that you collect, because it seems like a kind of a general purpose platform for collecting data.
Yes.
But the data that needs to be collected probably varies a lot across different target industries.
Yes.
So how do you deal with that? Is that like you vary the sensors that you put in place, or how do you deal with the variety of data that needs to be collected across different industries?
So both multiple types of sensors, but on an even higher level, the bigger problem is actually that every product and every procedure has to be different. So everything has to be redefined for every customer, basically. So we actually basically give you like a few levels for even that level. So you have like a drag and drop thing for really basic procedures, and also like a full DSL for how to, like a domain-specific language for how you need to structure the procedures. And then from there, to answer the actual sensor level question, each step of those is going to be different, and the sensors are going to be different. And so going from this like language for defining what shows up on the consoles to some actual chain of data traversing somewhere, basically you end up with a big graph over time. Like it's like a combination of a graph problem and a time series problem because everything's traversing around and you're associating one subcomponent to another subcomponent and collecting different data. So the system is very generic, and that's probably the hardest part about building it. But I think there's some like good solutions that we've come up with over time for all that. Mostly just good ways of saying, like labeling, this is numeric data. You can actually do like statistical controls. This is like Boolean data. Different levels for all different types. Yeah.
So you have consultants basically in order to adjust your solution for a specific factory/product company?
Effectively, the product company acts as the one defining the procedures right now. Most of the cases we work with, we actually work with the company either. We don't really need a consultant at this point. We're just basically not big enough that we need to do that. I think at some point we would, but the product companies are defining what their product is. They're defining what the constraints of what they want the final product to look like. So they're the right ones to actually do the definition. Educating them on why that's necessary, and then helping them have the right tools to do that is probably the biggest part of that there. Yeah, I keep trying to think of like ways I can make a programming language simple enough that like everyone will just use that and think about it that way. But it's like an ongoing kind of question. Yeah, tried a lot of different like little tools. Like try to make the tools to just visualize the line, and then try to make tools that like take the line visualization, basically like you program a bot for what's going to go around. But it's a fun problem.
You mentioned there was like a business model slide talking about paying for access to the data.
Yeah.
Do you get pushback from either, I guess, the product company side or the contract manufacturer side about the data not residing? I'm assuming this means the data doesn't reside with either the product company or the CM, it resides with you, right? Yeah. And I wonder if, I don't know, it could be like more traditional factory owners in China. Do you get any pushback of like, oh, all this stuff lives on your computers and not on mine? Like, or is that usually, are people almost like grateful, like, oh, you're going to host this, great, I don't have to deal with IoT and everything?
So far, the product company, like the problem that you're saying, the ownership of the data, I think the product companies tend to be more concerned about us owning it than the factories. The factories are pretty okay with it. Most of them don't want to deal with that. Like, they're a factory, they're not a software company. Interestingly, it's mostly bigger factories that have been interested in taking the data and doing interesting things with it than the product companies in a lot of cases. We've had like bigger factories that work with like higher end customers be really interested in being like, okay, how do I take this and then show the person who bought the bag exactly how it was made and how good our quality is. Those cases are really good ones. I like those ones. I think overall, a lot of our business is more around the idea of like, there's a lot of information not being collected by factories. Like people think about statistical quality control is pretty old now in a lot of ways. Like everyone, like any reasonable factory is probably doing that just to make sure everything stays calibrated the right way.
How many years have you been in business?
4 years. Yeah. So, yeah, I really like the history of all that. For some part of that, yeah. So statistical controls are pretty common, but people don't actually collect a lot of the things that actually went into building products. Like, there's not really people collecting like each screw going into a product, or an interesting way you end up with like the ability to pull apart product. If you collect everything along the chain of it, I don't think I've seen anyone else really do it. Collect everything along the chain, and then say you have a problem in the final completely assembled piece. Most companies they're going to take that piece and tear the whole thing apart just to find out what went wrong, and in the process, half the time they get rid of whatever actually caused the problem because they already pulled it all the way apart and didn't actually see like one screw here did it, and they just never minded. So the ability to then like scan something and basically look at it coming together has been really interesting for a lot of companies too. I think that's fun.
I'll ask next then.
So the information you collect, these data models, they stay confined and encrypted with you, or you share, and what do you do with them?
Because we charge for the access to it, we mostly just like, we're a gatekeeper for the data. Because we have cases where it's like the product company has access to it and not the factory, and vice versa in some cases. Depends on the relationship.
But for example, if you have a shoemaking customer, and then another shoemaking customer comes along, what are you going to do? Does the new customer going to start from scratch, or are you going to help him?
The new customer is going to start from scratch as far as the data. I've been really interested in basically like, I think there is a way that someone could build a system that takes really high-level defects and automatically detects them. Similar to what your initial question about the computer vision side, like someone should build something that just like takes, these are all scratches. Scratches look the same across certain types of materials and just detects those really quickly.
There's a company in Taiwan that does that.
Well, I should find that company. If you know what it is, could you tell me later? But, yeah.
I just want to know, have you charge the customer by royalty basis or pre-sale value based on this service?
Excuse me?
What kind of service you charge for? When you charge the customer for royalty basis or your pre-sale value for this product?
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty understanding.
How do you determine your pricing? Is it based on the resale value of the item, or is it like how do you?
No, it's just we actually charge for more our cost of storing the data. We don't like most of the that kind of like how we scale to different like tiers of customers. Instead of trying to scale first the product cost, we kind of consider the complexity of the product to be related to that. So if you have a more complex product, you're going to collect more steps. And all the steps are consistent price, basically. So we kind of encapsulate complexity and like the tier of the product based on that. But if you find a way to like charge, I mean, the iPhone's a really good example of charging a lot of money for a product that's really consistent and actually not that complex at this point as far as like what goes into assembling it usually. You can still have like, we don't really charge that much for that. Kind of, it's like a loophole a little bit.
So I have two questions. One, you have been working in China as a foreigner for, I guess, at least a couple of years?
It's like 2 years really.
2 years, yeah. So I'm kind of curious about your experience. You know, like if you were to look back 2 years ago versus now, what have you learned? If you were to give people any advice, what would you have done differently? And the second question, I'm sort of curious, you know, like with blockchain being the top, you know, heated topic this day, what's your view in terms of using blockchain with the application in supply chain management?
Okay, so I'll start from the foreigner in China part. I think for one, I would definitely learn Chinese more. I think a lot of companies that I've seen, I think, underestimate people that live there and work there, or even like on the line more than they should. I think that people that are on the line and everything have a lot more to contribute than they expect. And I think I've really kind of like built up this opinion over time that like quality control is really a cultural problem more than anything else. Like people need to, like that's something that Japan has done well historically, that I think China needs to like catch up on a little bit. It's basically understanding that the workers on the line have real things to contribute with how the product should be made. There's a lot of like top-down management that happens in China, I think. That's an interesting thing that could change that I've learned. Yeah. As far as the blockchain thing, Eric and I have had a few discussions with that because he's the blockchain guy in our group. If anyone wants to talk to him about that. But I think for supply chain, blockchain has the issue with permissions that needs a lot of work. Like in most of the blockchain things, so like, hey, we can transparently access this, we can anonymize most of it. There's not a good way of like selectively giving this person access to who and what this is on a case-by-case basis, and that's a problem that has to be solved. There's a JP Morgan project that does do permissions. I haven't like, looked into, but not really delved deep enough to really know if it's an answer to the question yet. Yeah.
So my question is, a customer can rent a console from you and then they cannot be paying the data or not. So on average, how often does the customer who rents a console from you also pay the data?
Could you repeat the question, but like closer?
How often does a customer who rents a console from you also pays for the data? Because as a customer, I can make a choice for paying just one console, but not wanting to pay for the data.
Oh no, these all happen together. They're not independent models.
It's a package.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are way cheaper than this. Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny because a lot of people are like they usually put the list in this order, and they're like, oh, that's fine, that's okay, hold on. Yeah. Yeah, mostly because data piles up, and then when you start doing like high volume manufacturing, that number gets really big. So.
Questions today. I noticed earlier in the presentation you sort of showed like the assembly instructions can be adaptable and things like that. Of like I think right on the console it shows different instructions for different. Anyway, the question is, have you guys had an application or can you speak to the applicability towards customization? So like for example in the shoe world I'm in now, like say Nike ID is a program that Nike has of like the customer can customize shoes, right? And in sort of talking to a lot of shoe factories, it's just basically a giant headache for them. They hate it. And does a Assembly's product or a version of it address the idea of kind of like product, like order by order customization, which is basically what like Andy's dealing with, every pair of shoes is sort of specific.
So that's something like a big focus for us actually, as far as like the idea of having different ways to define the procedures and eventually falling down to this like DSL version is basically the answer to that question. Because there's lots of interesting cases where basically like, to answer that question in a really specific way, we do that for our own warehouse for laser etching. So we actually have like a laser etcher just like attached to one of our consoles right now that we're only like actually a couple weeks ago we actually did start using. But basically the console just pulls out the order that comes in, says this is what needs to go on here, and because the console really is just effectively a computer, you just press enter and instead it print it. But being able to just change the instructions does a good job of that. A big part of it that happens is to individually serialize the unit and then to track and adjust things as the unit itself goes down the line. Which causes the whole problem with, then you have to rescan the unit each line to actually find out what unit's there. That's another questionable problem to try to solve, like how do you scan things really quickly? But customizing it on a per unit basis does work pretty well with the console. And it's pretty easy to solve, really. Comes back around to the whole network problem too, because then you're in like some middle of nowhere factory trying to customize things per orders, and how do you get the data from the order to the custom to the factory fast enough, and this whole round trip. But it's doable.
Thank you.
Of course. Since we have you on stage, kind of we can ask anything, right? So
I guess anything.
All right.
Hopefully related to the product.
No, surely. I mean, you've been doing this for 4 years, and it would be interesting to hear a couple of wisdoms from you. Like, what is it that you learn most about building a product, and what is it that you learn most about building a company? So.
Oh, that's a discussion person. That's good. I think the biggest thing and hardest thing over time that I've also learned is like being able to trust other people to do things. Like to have like a team of people and to actually rely on them is definitely like I think a problem for a lot of companies, especially initially, where you start out, you build the whole product yourself. Then how do you get the team to actually help you and work together? How do you keep them up to date on this whole huge system and stuff like that? And I think figuring that out is probably a really important thing for companies and should be emphasized more. Yeah, so trust.
Hello? So how did you start?
Like at the very, very beginning of the company?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we didn't start with building this product at all. The company started from, I actually worked basically for my co-founder initially. I had a company making a library management tool for electrical engineers. And then he left that company, we decided to start a new company, which was this, and we built a product lifecycle management tool, which I think most product companies probably try to use some of the existing ones now. And then eventually it led to this, and then we did Y Combinator and focused on just this, and then, yeah, now we're here.
Thank you.
Oh.
I have another question. So you have been in Taiwan for about 1.5 weeks so far, and you have another 2.5 weeks or so to go. So what can be helpful for you in Taiwan? For you personally, professionally, what are you looking for at the moment?
It's a very anchor Taiwan question. We've been trying to find different factories that would be interesting to work with here, but I'd also like to know more about product companies that'd be interested, and then really what's different from in business, this kind of business from place to place. It's something I want to find out more about still. what tools do people use changes a lot from whatever location you are. Like China, I found out like half the factories you work with have actually built their own ERP systems instead of just buying one, which is, from a software engineering perspective, just completely insane. I'm interested to see what tools people use here, probably. If anyone of you has a product company, I would like to know what inventory management tool you use.
Anybody working at a product company here?
They don't have to answer that right now.
No, you don't have to answer. I'm just curious. Do we have anybody here?
Yeah, there's these three.
These three? Okay, cool. Any other questions that you'd like to ask? This is AMA style. Only tonight.
Yeah, there you go. If anyone else has any questions like my Combinator and stuff too, you can answer like those questions as like a startup. Or like, we have like really just like high level topics. So Y Combinator company, we have like a team that's in like mostly Chinese by like head count wise in Shenzhen and Shanghai, and then our headquarters is in the US. So a lot of like staying up late to communicate with them, which is an interesting thing. So distributed team stuff. And then those are pretty good quick things to ask about. On that specific.
Why don't we start with those?
As you grow, which is all companies are trying to do, what would be your toughest scalability challenge?
Mostly the installation of the systems, because I keep getting to like more and more small problems that we've solved or have ways of solving, I feel like. But as soon as you end up in a case where something depends on another thing and part of the line, basically the consoles have to start talking to each other in a reliable way. And so networking inside the factory is a really big issue. Basically you start managing a distributed system inside of a factory with unreliable internet. And that's like as hard as a software problem can possibly be, I think. And then the answer is installations and how to fix that without having to just rebuild their entire network for them.
Question, where's data stored? Is it
where's the data stored? Is it stored in the United States? And so a factory in China has to use VPN to break through the wall to access it?
So the data is stored in Japan. And then the answer to the whole firewall question is, like, that's definitely been the fun part. Basically, the data is stored in the consoles themselves to a bunch of servers. Some are in China and some aren't. Depends on like network conditions. And then to Japan, and then to the US. And every meeting I've ever had with Amazon, I've asked the question, it's like, hey, how would you just solve this for me? And the answer is always like, we're not sure. The category stuff is usually called like delay tolerant networking. Mostly because as long as you're not blocked by the firewall, you're actually fine, it turns out. Unless you're doing something like directly in conflict with the government, you're not blocked. And then it just turns out that the firewall is a huge bottleneck. Like all the traffic is going through the firewall, then it's like around like 10 o'clock at night and everything just stops working basically because suddenly all of China's watching videos online of telemetry stuff. So for that, basically the whole trick was just how small can you get every network request. So I do a bunch of really fun stuff there to make that work.
Do we have any more questions before we move to the networking and drinking session?
If it's like if it's like the same product company and share the same factory, same land for a lot, you only sell data, the third service you provide, right? And like the second question is, except for blockchain, do you see automation impact on your business in the future, or like your services focus on more labor-intense supply chain, like manufacturing business, or like are you gonna move like your market focus to like Southeastern Asia or somewhere?
Okay, so the first question that you asked was some of the data, right? So more than one company using the same factory. Really, you can think of some of the data as much more like just infrastructure cost. Like we're like AWS in that way. Like we're only selling you access to your data. We're not selling the other product company data ever. Was that your question? We never sell you one of your competitors' data, basically. That'd be like horrible. Then for the blockchain and like automation question, I guess the question is more like how does automation affect our product? And basically it makes everything way easier. I have this whole kind of idea of like, your ideal world is basically like everything's a video game, and therefore you have access to everything going on all the time. Any like sensors are completely unnecessary, you just absorb everything. So MMOs have like a way better time doing cool like ideas of what's going on inside in contrast to people inside a factory. And then the step down is where everything's robots, and then so you do have a bunch of data collected directly from the thing performing the task. And then the worst case is a human does it, and I have no idea what you're doing at any point in time, and hopefully you're somewhere in the range of the camera, and hopefully I have an idea of, did you screw in the right thing? So, easier, the more automation, basically.
I have a question, a very general question about work in China, work culture in China.
Can you comment about it? Anything that surprised you? People work hard, or people relaxed? People change companies? Any comments or observations you have?
I was surprised that I feel like people in China actually get up later than I expected. People stay up later and get up later, which is actually more like the Bay Area. People do work really hard. Yeah, everyone that I met was really hardworking. Really, I don't really know very actually lazy people. That may just be like a selection bias, though. Yeah, but yeah, 10 hours a day, but towards the evening has been an interesting thing for probably. Yeah, actually, a bunch of the factories I work with would stay open till like 10 o'clock at night for sure. Actually, continuing to work.
All right, last chance. No more? Cool. So we're gonna wrap up. Thank you so much, and let's give Colton another round of applause for this.